Please subscribe to our channel, Pacific Front Untold, and be sure to leave a comment after watching a video. Pre-colonial Vietnam was split into 3 states: Cochin China, Annam, and Tonkin. Cochin China covered the most southern part of Vietnam, in which its primary city was Saigon. Annam was the central state of Vietnam, where the ancient capital of Vietnam, Hue, was located. Tonkin was the most northern region, where its main city was Hanoi. The first Europeans to arrive in Indochina, which at that time was made up of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, began with Portuguese and Dutch missionaries during the 16th and 17th centuries, respectively. One of their main objectives was to set up trading posts along the Vietnamese coast. During the mid-1620s, Jesuit priest Father Alexandre de Rhodes arrived in Cochin China and traveled throughout Vietnam to Tonkin. While in Vietnam, de Rhodes learned the language by speaking with villagers and wrote several books chronicling his experiences in Vietnam and his interest in the Vietnamese language. In 1630, de Rhodes was expelled from Vietnam for his preaching of Catholicism, but he was able to make converts of over 6,000 Vietnamese before he departed. In 1640, de Rhodes returned to Cochin China to continue establishing missionary outposts and to gain more converts to Catholicism. He was executed in 1645, but before his death, there was a total of over 120,000 Vietnamese who had converted to Christianity. Father de Rhodes was important because through his determination, he was able to spread Catholicism in a significant way in Vietnam, and through his books, many others would follow his path into Southeast Asia to spread Christianity and establish trading networks. After these European missionaries, there was an increased interest by other European nations to not only control Vietnamese ports, but also to control Southeast Asia and its major trade routes. The end of the 17th century saw the arrival of the first French in the form of the French East India Trading Company organization, who were there to establish a trading network in Southeast Asia and continue the spread of Catholicism by its missionaries. A few centuries after the French established missions and trading ports across the Vietnamese coast, the French missionaries, traders, and soldiers were attacked by the local Vietnamese, in part due to prejudice against Christians and foreigners. In retaliation, the French fought against the indigenous Vietnamese tribes and made plans to take control over Indochina to establish a firm colonial foothold. In 1862, French and Vietnamese emissaries met in Saigon to negotiate the end of the war. The treaty ceded Cochin China to France, giving its missionaries the freedom to build churches and preach. France also gained freedom of passage for its ships through the Mekong Delta and opened Vietnam's ports to trade with the West. In 1863, Cochin China gained its first governor, Admiral Pierre-Paul de la Grandière, who took an interest in international affairs with Cambodia and the Cambodian monarchy. As governor, La Grandière signed a treaty with Cambodia, granting protection for trade. La Grandière also proposed the French expand into Tonkin in northern Vietnam. As a result, he sent 2 expeditionary forces to invade and capture Tonkin. Although the first expeditionary advance failed in 1868, the second one, launched in 1883, was able to successfully conquer Hanoi. Following the French capture of Hanoi, there was a meeting between the French and Vietnamese Emperor Tu Du. A treaty was signed, known as the Treaty of Hue, which granted France full control over Vietnam. The French government followed their victory by merging their colonies into a single state under one authority figure. This state was known as the Indo-Chinese Union, or French Indochina. Along with the colonies of Vietnam, it also included Laos and Cambodia. France altered the political and economic structure of French Indochina to benefit their ways of governing and to make it easier to govern under French rule. First, France moved the capital from Hue to Hanoi, which changed the administrative and political focus of French Indochina closer to China and the Red River Delta. France also established a governor-general who was in charge from Hanoi over all of French Indochina, while governors of smaller colonies, like Cochinchina, would serve under the Governor-General. The Governor-General was also supported by the Upper Council of Indochina, which was a group of 5 directors in charge of the colony's services. The French not only altered Vietnam's political system, but also changed the social and economic environment within French Indochina. In 1897, Paul Dumaret became Governor-General of French Indochina and began forming departments to control finances, customs and monopolies, public works, agriculture and trade, the postal and telegraph service, and other state agencies to maintain civil and international services. Dumaret also organized 3 monopolies based around opium, salt, and alcohol. France then applied a heavy tax on these items for the Vietnamese and confiscated Vietnamese property if the taxes were not paid. These taxes were used to help finance the administrative costs of running Indochina. The countries that composed French Indochina, particularly Vietnam, had significant economic benefits for France based on their natural resources such as rice, rubber, and coal. The French government in Indochina began exporting these goods while using local labor to increase their production rates to meet an ever-increasing demand. One outcome was that Vietnam became the 3rd largest global exporter of rice, coming in behind only Burma and Thailand. Tire producers, like the Michelin Tire Company, bought thousands of acres of land in Vietnam to grow rubber plants, while employing a Vietnamese peasant labor force to harvest it. In return, the peasants were able to keep their land, but it remained under French jurisdiction. The Vietnamese farmers, peasants, and coal miners were typically underpaid and overworked to support French manufacturing and trading companies. Due to its strategic geographic location and significant natural resources, Vietnam played a key role economically and militarily as part of French Indochina and in Southeast Asia overall. For the next 100 years, France and Japan would see Vietnam as a country to use for their own economic and military goals. Ultimately, the colonial and military occupation experienced by the Vietnamese would turn them against their oppressors and lead into one of the longest and most important conflicts of the 20th century.